Welcome to Reading the Bible with Pastor. Today we're on Exodus chapter 38. Now that might sound like a weird place to begin. We had last left off ending chapter 37 several years ago. I wanted to finish Exodus, these last few chapters, and get it taken care of, give me a little bit of practice. But chapter 38 and following is about finishing the completion of the tabernacle, the place where the Israelites would sacrifice to the Lord and received from him his blessing, his forgiveness. Chapter 38 is about building the altar of burnt offering, where most of the sacrifices would take place, the building of the bronze basin, and the making of the court. There's going to be some more texts that we'll look at next time. All of these instructions of the creation of the tabernacle are laid out some 10 chapters beforehand. In fact, chapter 27 will describe how the Israelites are going to make the tabernacle. God gives these instructions to Bezalel to be the foreman or project manager for these things to take place. And so we're actually going to read about how these things were built and completed according to the command of God. And that's key here, is that the people listened to the Lord and did what he said, as much as we should follow the command of the Lord and do what he says as well. So let's begin with verse 1. He, that is Bezalel, made the altar of burnt offering of acacia wood, 5 cubits its length and 5 cubits its breadth. It was square, and 3 cubits its height. Now, a cubit, again, is from the elbow to the middle finger, about 1.5 feet. So this puts it 7.5 feet in square and then 4.5 feet tall. So it's a fairly large altar. He made horns for it on its 4 corners. Its horns were of one piece with it, and he overlaid it with bronze. These horns, not entirely sure what they were used for. There are times when blood will be placed on the horns. There's some thought that it did have a practical use in order to tie the animals as they got them ready to be sacrificed. We'll continue here with verse 3. And he made all the utensils of the altar, the pots, the shovels, the basins, the forks, and the fire pans. He made all its utensils of bronze. And he made for the altar a grating, a network of bronze under its ledge, extending halfway down. He cast 4 rings into the 4 corners of the bronze grating as holders for the poles. He made the poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with bronze, and he put the poles through the rings on the sides of the altar to carry it with them. He made it hollow with boards. So, when we read about this grating, there's several different interpretations, ranging from a grating by which it's most like a barbecue pit in the middle of the altar by which you can put the sacrifices on, or even grating on the bottom half to allow for ventilation for the fire and the sacrifices. I've also seen a combination where it's the bottom portion of the altar along with a grating, and this actually sits underneath the wooden box overlaid with bronze that sits into some hooks, if you will, that holds the altar and the grating together to be lifted up by poles as one unit, even though they're 2 pieces. Don't get too carried away on how it actually looked. The Lord is guiding them, and he's in their presence as well, guiding them on how to build this. So as it's built, it is being built according to the command of God, in his presence, with his will, and will be used for his sacrifices. And this is key for us to remember that the Israelites there in the wilderness, they're gearing themselves up to be able to interact with their God as he says so. And this is just the beginning, to build the tabernacle according to what he says. That's the altar of burnt offering. We'll continue with the bronze basin. Verse 8. He made the basin of bronze and its stand of bronze from the mirrors of the ministering women who ministered in the entrance of the tent of meeting. So as the Israelites left Egypt, they were told to bring things with them, including their own possessions and the possessions of their neighbors. And these mirrors are not the silver-backed mirrors that you might be thinking of that are flat. This would probably be a sheet of bronze that is polished to a very high polish, and that would be able to reflect their face. So these mirrors that used to be showing the vanity of man are now being used to cleanse the priests and the sacrifices with water in this big bowl, this bronze basin. As we continue on, we'll be talking about the curtains around the tabernacle court. And this will give the overall perimeter of the tabernacle. And he made the court. From the south side, the hangings of the court were of fine twined linen, 100 cubits. There are 20 pillars and their 20 bases that were of bronze. But the hooks of the pillars and their fillets were of silver. And for the north side, there were hangings of 100 cubits. There are 20 pillars and their 20 bases of bronze. But the hooks of the pillars and their fillets were of silver. So these are the two long sides of the tabernacle, and they would be approximately 150 feet long. And the pillars and the bases and fillets, basically this was a way to hold up the curtains. Think of basically poles with weighted bottoms and then hooks to hold them and a little cap on top. And this is the way that the tabernacle fence or curtains were made. And then verse 12, we hear about the west side. You might think of that as the back end of the tabernacle. And for the west side were hangings of 50 cubits. There are 10 pillars and their 10 bases. The hooks of the pillars and their fillets were of silver. So 50 cubits would be about 75 feet. So the tabernacle was 150 feet long by 75 feet wide. And for the front to the east, 50 cubits. The hangings for one side of the gate were 15 cubits with their 3 pillars and their 3 bases, about 22 and a half feet. And so for the other side. On both sides of the gate of the court were hangings of 15 cubits with their 3 pillars and their 3 bases. All the hangings around the court were of fine twined linen, and the bases of the pillars were of bronze, but the hooks of the pillars and their fillets were of silver. The overlaying of their capitals was also of silver, and all their pillars of the court were filleted with silver. And the screen for the gate of the court was embroidered with needlework in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. So the east, the front, had an entrance, a gate, by which everything entered and exited. The priests, the sacrifices, the people. And this is opened up with a curtain that has purple, scarlet, and blue yarn. And this is actually a reflection of the tabernacle itself, the tent of meeting itself, that used these yarns as well. You're entering into a holy place, is what this is supposed to symbolize for the people. So we continue. It was 20 cubits long and 5 cubits high in its breadth, corresponding to the hangings of the court. And their pillars were four in number. Their 4 bases were of bronze, their hooks of silver, and the overlaying of their capitals and their fillets of silver. And all the pegs of the tabernacle and for the court all around were of bronze. We'll stop there for here today, remembering that Bezalel, and as being foreman project manager, is completing the work of building the tabernacle. And we'll continue on next time with verse 21 as we hear the materials for the tabernacle. As we listen to this, I want you to remember that God is telling them how to follow his commands, giving them instructions by which to come into his presence. It reminds us of our work today as we come into his presence, biting into his commands, learning his teachings, doing what the Son of God told us. You might think of the ways that we approach communion worthily, recognizing our sins and the fact that God is giving to us his very body and blood for the forgiveness of our sins. There's a great relation in terms of the sacrifice in the Old Testament and also the one-time sacrifice of Christ and how we come into God's presence to receive his forgiveness. That's enough for today. We'll pick up next time with verse 21.